It's the end of an era.
I'll miss the clowns, but not the circus.
As Wisconsin's longest-serving Assembly Speaker,
how honored I am to have played a small part in democracy,
announces plans to retire.
Probably one of the most powerful speakers that Wisconsin politics has ever had.
Plus,
this is an incredibly polarizing topic.
Wisconsin's water war.
This is a big deal.
Prompts an uproar in Madison.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it.
This week on Open Record, the last-minute push for new laws.
And let me tell you, this job is stressful.
For lawmakers hit the campaign trail.
The Assembly will stand in recess until a call of the chair.
From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Bryan Polcyn, and I am joined by Fox 6 Wake Up News anchor and reporter Carl Deffenbaugh. Hello again,
Great
Carl.
to be here.
And we are joined once again by Fox 6 political reporter Jason Calvi. Hey, Jason.
Good morning, guys.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. It's a very busy time in the world of Wisconsin politics. We're in the final days of a 2-year legislative session that began in January of 2025, and that means there is a race to get pending legislation across the finish line. A flurry of activity last week, including an announcement from Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, a controversial strategic maneuver to pass a wake surfing bill, and a lot more. Jason has been in the middle of all of it. We're going to talk about that. We'll get his perspective from the time he spent inside the Capitol. All that and more right after this.
We are back here on Open Record. So Thursday, February 19th, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos announced that he will not be seeking re-election for his Assembly seat and certainly with it, his role as Speaker. He is the longest-serving Assembly Speaker in Wisconsin history, has had quite the legacy, quite the career here in Madison. Jason, you made very clear to us, this was not a surprise to people like you who cover Wisconsin politics so closely. It seemed like it was a bit more to the general population and certainly people not as tuned in to the inner workings of Madison. Why was that not a surprise for you, Robin Vos's announcement?
I think we've been asking the question even back when you remember in 2024, he faced recalls from people that thought he wasn't pushing hard enough to question the results of the 2020 election. So he faced recalls and survived in 2024. He also faced a primary challenge from a conservative Republican who was backed by President Donald Trump at the time, and he survived that as well. So he's been up many, many times against opponents, even from his own party, and we thought maybe that the end of the era was going to be coming, maybe even back in 2024 after the recall. But I think potentially he stayed on to say, hey, I'm not leaving because of you critics of mine. I'm gonna leave on my own terms. And so we've been asking the question for years, and especially over the last year, we've been asking, do you think you're going to run for re-election? We've been asking people in the Capitol, do you think he's going to run for re-election? There's been rumors that maybe he wouldn't run for re-election. And then when it came to that last week, it was told to us by sources that they heard he was going to make his announcement when the session wrapped up. Well, he didn't wait until the session wrapped up. He waited till the last day of the Assembly session. And at the very beginning, I think it was stunning news to be in that chamber and hear him say it. Even though we had speculation that it was going to be coming, he still, I think stunned his audience by revealing one of the big reasons why he was not running for re-election is because he had a heart attack, a mild heart attack back in the fall. And he said that was sort of, in his words, a sign from God that it was time to hang up his speakership.
I thought it was interesting when he brought up the heart attack. He said it was a mild one. He's doing fine. But his doctor told him, you need less stress. Yeah. And he said, this has been a stressful job, to say the least.
And we're laughing because he got a laugh out of the whole chamber when he said that. It is a very stressful job. I mean, some people call being the leader kind of like herding cats, because you've got all these different factions, even in your own party, that you're trying to get a majority of votes to get legislation passed. And, you heard that from Speaker Paul Ryan as well, how difficult the job is of leading your caucus, whether you're a Republican or Democrat. It's a tough job. And he's had this now for the longest reign in Wisconsin state history. I mean, it's incredible how long he's been at the top spot of the legislature.
Let's look at that big picture for all that he has been a part of over that era. Like you said, the longest running, going back to when was he elected speaker? 2013. So this is his 14th year now that he has served as speaker. And that takes us through so many ups and downs in both national politics and Wisconsin politics. This state becoming such a purple battleground state of such importance on the national scale as well. What do you think his legacy is? What will people remember about Robin Vos in that leadership role?
I think we take take it back to even before he became Speaker in 2010, he was the co-chair, the Assembly chair of the Joint Finance Committee. That's that very important committee that sets the direction for the budget and things like that. So that's a really key role in the Assembly that he had as co-chair of that joint committee.
He was chair of that during a really important time.
I mean, in 2010 we can go to you guys because you were in the state of Wisconsin at that time, especially Bryan, you were there. The Act 10 protests. He was one of the Republican leaders, not the Speaker at that point, but the powerful committee. He was the chairman of that committee as they're passing Act 10.
Yeah, so it was the Scott Walker era, and obviously that Act 10 was the legislation that stripped collective bargaining rights from most public employees. It was extremely controversial. Wisconsin became the center of national political attention. Protests in Madison that were packing the courthouse and the Capitol Square for days and weeks on end.
The Democrats leaving the state at some point. The Democrats
leaving the state, that's right, to make sure that Republicans didn't have enough people in the Senate it was Democratic senators who left the state, so they could not complete the vote. It was a really remarkable time in Wisconsin political history, and that was Robin Vos's rise to prominence.
Oh, yeah.
And I still remember the first time I heard his name in a way that I remembered it, and I think a lot of people in the public, the first time they heard who is Robin Vos was when a protester went into a Madison bar and poured a beer on his head. Yeah. And that protester, Miles Kristen, was ultimately arrested and charged with a misdemeanor. He was convicted of misdemeanor disorderly conduct. That was really when you knew that Robin Vos was being targeted as a person who was responsible. Beyond Governor Walker, he was responsible in the eyes of those who didn't like the legislation. And that was really what set him up for becoming this huge political figure for Republicans.
And you got to factor in, during this course of time in the Scott Walker administration with the Republican legislature, they were able to set the legislative maps. And for a whole decade under these maps that, again, Speaker Vos would have been one of the top Republicans at that point in time. He wasn't Speaker at the point, but they passed these maps, and that really helped solidify the Republican majority in the Assembly and in the state Senate for a whole decade. And it wasn't really until the Supreme Court got involved and said these maps are unconstitutional. Go back. You gotta redraw these things.
We'll get back to some of the ups and downs of a long political career, but tell us who this person is, right? From Burlington, he's represented Rochester, but different parts of Racine and Walworth counties during his time in the state assembly. Who is he? Why was he drawn to politics? And how has he lasted so long in that stressful job?
I mean, I think even if you talk to Democrats, they will say he's a very intelligent, shrewd negotiator, and you would see that there's always these big fights over the budget. Even when there's a Republican governor and Republican legislature, they'd still fight over the fine details of, okay, what should be the tax policy of the state? How should we handle these big issues regarding the budget? And he is somebody who I think is a very smart political operator. He knows how to work the crowd. As I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like herding cats when you've got people on the far right, you've got more moderates, and you've got all these people in your caucus, and you got to kind of get them all on the same page to pass legislation and get the majority vote. They had a near super majority at the very end before the maps changed over. They didn't have the super majority in the Assembly. They were just 2 seats away. But I mean, that just shows how much power the Republicans had in that legislature for many, many years.
And you think about the fact that he clashed for a long time, obviously, with Governor Evers. You've got a Democrat in the governor's office, and you've got Robin Vos leading Speaker of the House and a Republican-controlled legislature. So they clashed, understandably so. But he didn't just clash with Governor Evers. That was to be expected, I think, because of the party leadership or the partisan divide. But he clashed with President Trump. Yep. And he really found himself sort of taking it from both directions. And that came in part because I think it was during the re-election effort for President Trump in 2020 that he called him an embarrassment. He said that he didn't think he should be the leader of that ticket. There was that. There's also, and I didn't realize this till researching it further, Robin Vos roomed at UW-Whitewater with Reince Priebus, who was head of the Republican Party and
chief of staff for Trump.
For Trump. Trump obviously fired him, and so clearly he became once he fell on the outs with President Trump, things got a lot harder for Robin Vos.
They did, and he faced this recall. I mean, first of all, he faced a primary challenge from the right. They didn't feel like the word that Republicans use is rhino. which is funny.
Republican in name only, right? Yeah.
Republican in name only, which is funny. At one point in time, I did cover a rhino exhibit at the zoo, and I was like, isn't it funny that the political reporter is covering rhinos at the zoo? But yeah, rhino is sort of a negative phrase that Republicans use against their fellow Republicans. Republican in name only.
To say they're too moderate.
They're too moderate. Yeah. And so some of on the more conservative side of the Republican Party would say Speaker Vos was a rhino. He wasn't doing enough to challenge the 2020 election results. And, he did face this primary challenge against Adam Steen. You may remember that challenge. And President Trump at that point, endorsed not Robin Vos, but the competitor on the Republican primary side of things. He nearly won that primary. He nearly won the election because it was a complicated story, but it was a very close call. And at one point in time in 2024, the Republicans also tried to recall Robin Vos from his position. They were unsuccessful. They didn't get that to work. But again, Robin Vos survived a couple near falls there at the end.
It's interesting. He was, a lot of President Trump's ire toward him was because he wouldn't challenge the 2020 election results in the way he wanted to. But then he hires former Supreme Court Justice Michael Gableman to do an investigation, spends a bunch of money on that. It becomes sort of a political disaster. And he ultimately said that was an embarrassment. It was a huge mistake to have done that. Yeah,
that was hiring Michael Gableman to be this sort of special investigator of the elections, and spent more than
$2 million of taxpayer money.
Nearly $2 million or more than $2 million of taxpayer money on this investigation in the 2020 election results. And at the end of the day, Robin Vos is admitting that he regrets that decision to hire Gableman, and Michael Gableman, former Supreme Court Justice, is facing discipline from the state, from the he facing various challenges with that whole process of lawyer.
How he investigated and what was spent on that. Yeah.
Right. And so, he's facing his own problems now, but Speaker Vos has called that an embarrassment, this whole hiring of Michael Gableman.
We have to move on to the next subject, but I want to end it with this. What do you think Robin Vos's legacy will be in Wisconsin politics?
I think keeping that ship for a whole decade with the maps, with Act 10, and then all of the victories that they had from their perspective for the conservative agenda, whether it's expanding, he mentioned this in his speech. He gave a heartfelt speech on the floor where he got choked up several times talking about how great of an honor it was to be the Speaker of the Wisconsin Assembly. But things like school choice, he mentioned the expansion of the school voucher program in the state. He talked about tax cuts and how they were able to cut taxes, income taxes across the state of Wisconsin. So, I think those are some of the things he's going to see as his legacy. I think just the fact that Republicans were able to hold that majority under those maps, which really helped give them near super majorities at the end there in both the state Senate and the Assembly, are going to be things that will be part of his legacy. And even when you looked at what Governor Evers said when Speaker Vos announced he wasn't running for re-election, and Governor Evers said, we may have disagreed on a lot, but this man is a brilliant deal maker and political operative. He's done, from Democrats' perspective, they saw him as a foe. They were not happy with Speaker Vos because he was a very smart tactician as far as trying to get things passed, or, fighting the governor. They fought over the pandemic restrictions, right? The legislature would go to court, and the conservative Supreme Court at that time sided with the legislature on things like the safer at home order and the shutdown and the mask mandates and things like that.
So changing of the guard soon to come. Robin Vos made that announcement at the beginning of, I think it was about a 7-hour session of the Assembly, which passed 45 bills in one day on the last day of the session, including one of the most controversial bills of this session. We're going to talk about that when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. We've talked a lot on this podcast about wake surfing, but the legislature has been largely silent on the issue until last week. There were a pair of competing bills that were introduced, and they quickly got to the hearing stage and all the way to the Assembly floor. And then there was an unexpected maneuver on the Assembly floor that had Democrats literally howling in the chamber. Jason, you were there to see this. First of all, let's just take a step back for a minute. and if I say wake surfing, you go, what's that? To say that's the most controversial bill of the year or one of the most seems a little bit strange, doesn't it? I mean, when
There's
you
some
think
other
of
issues
all
in
of
the state, right?
Yeah, you think of all of the issues that face people in Wisconsin, but we have a lot of lakes. We have a lot of people who love to recreate, and our lakes are very personal and important. And the issue of wake surfing has been very divisive. Real quickly, if you don't know, it's a sport that involves boats that create waves big enough to surf on an inland lake. And of course, those big waves have caused big controversy, and that's really what this is all about. And so over the past couple of years, as this become a bigger and bigger issue statewide, we've seen the Wisconsin Conservation Congress hold votes that were overwhelmingly in favor of limiting or restricting wake surfing. And town by town all across the state, ordinances are being passed that either ban wake boats or ban artificially enhanced waves or severely restrict them, especially on smaller lakes. But this, Jason, like last week, all of a sudden, it's just a flurry of activity in the legislature.
I mean, this thing rushed through, right? I mean, there was a committee hearing, and then
like on Monday, and then
right, and
yeah,
so and
it's on the assembly floor by Thursday.
Right. I mean, it was very quick, and as far as if you're going to share your public comments and things like that, I mean, the turnaround was so quick before the assembly voted on it. And then it was very interesting because as they're having a debate on the assembly floor, one of the state representatives got up and said, I'm looking at this proposed amendment that we're about to vote on, and it deals with, this must be wrong. This has got to be wrong. Sandhill crane hunting. No, this amendment's in the wrong spot, right, guys?
And it turned out
it was fully intentional. So I'll tell you about some of the politics behind the scenes on that, because the question would be, why are they adding a Sandhill crane hunt to a bill about wake surfing?
I'll be honest, reading this from the outside and then seeing some of Jason's reporting on that day, which again was just a flurry, it kind of read like an Onion article, right? You're like, how do you combine wake surfing and Sandhill crane hunting into one thing?
And how you do that is a real stretch, I think.
Yeah.
But why they did it is it's politics. It's the herding of cats, right? So this issue has been extremely divisive within the majority party, the Republican Party. You have many outstate Republicans and Democrats. It's really almost been less of a partisan issue than it has been a rural versus urban, maybe.
And this is specific to the wake surfing, you're saying, right?
Correct.
In terms of the
wake
damage.
surfing issue. Sorry, you're right. The wake surfing issue.
The issue is the potential damage to both the shoreline and the lake bed of these different lakes, depending on the depth, depending on how far these boats are, and just the amount of water they churn up to create those waves.
That's the primary argument that opponents are making. But in many cases, the question is, are they really worried about the shoreline, or are they worried about it interrupting their fishing and their kayaking and their other activities? And that's where this becomes really controversial. But you have a lot of people who live in lake districts or districts with a lot of lake recreation who their constituents don't want wake boats messing with their lakes. On the other hand, you have others who are supportive of the water sports industry.
Yeah.
Mercury Marine is based in Fond du Lac. So you had Senator Fine, who introduces a bill, and his honesty says, I'm here supporting Mercury Marine. That's why I have this bill. So you had, what you end up with is the people who support the wake sports or the water sports industry or the boat manufacturers who wanted to set a restriction of 200 feet from shore. They said, we agree there should be a restriction, but what they really wanted was a statewide standard that would allow them to go in and challenge these local ordinances and try to open some of these lakes back up. That's ultimately what they were hoping for. On the other hand, you had the people who are critics of wake surfing saying, I don't care what you do statewide. They think it should be 500 feet. They actually think it should be 700. They were going to settle on 500. They think there should be a depth restriction. But more importantly, they said local control needs to be paramount, meaning these local ordinances need to stay in place. And the bill needs to be very explicit about that. So you have all that going on, but it's all within the Republican Party where a lot of this discord is.
So again, how do you get to Sandhill cranes?
That's where I'm coming back to is to get enough Republicans on board for the industry favored bill, for the boat industry favored bill. They needed to turn I'm told one particular lawmaker, and I haven't reached out to him, so I'm not going to say his name, but there was one in sort of the outstate part of Wisconsin they needed to flip. And it was someone who was particularly supportive of Sandhill crane hunting. Mm-hmm. So they said, if we put your bill on this bill, will you vote for wake surfing? And they got the votes. And that's how they did it. Now, it got a little more controversial, Jason. You were there because they added this amendment and then they did the vote and they did it really quickly. And ultimately the Speaker pro tem said he held a voice vote and said unanimous consent, the bill passes.
Yeah.
And what happened when that happened?
You know, so they do a yeas and the nays. So the yeas means I'm voting yes, and the nays are voting no. And normally the way this works is that, the people that are voting nay could be louder, but the Speaker pro temp's going to say the yeas have it, the yeses have it. I mean, because they're the Republicans, they have the majority.
It's kind of like show of hands, right?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
But it's, so at the end of the day, they did this voice vote and no, people are yelling no. And, but the yeas have it. So then they're like, no, we demand a roll call vote. But it already.
And that would be a specific attribution of nay goes to this assemblyman.
Roll
yay
call vote,
goes
they
to
go
this. Yeah.
person by person say, how did you vote?
Yeah. Normally, for a roll call vote, you're going to push, yes, no, and it's going to be recorded in the record as yes, no. So at the end of this voice vote, which is how it passed, it did pass the assembly on a voice vote with some loud heckling no's, and it was almost like pretty chaotic, I would say. I don't want to use that word lightly, but it was a chaotic scene on the assembly floor. As first the revelation that we're voting not only on wake surfing but also on a sandhill crane hunt, and then secondly the yeas and the nays have it, or the yeas have it, and then there's going to be this no roll call vote. So then after that vote, then Democrats lined up in a long line to go up to the clerk and register their disagreement with that vote. So if you go to the record, it will show the names of those representatives who.
There were 3 Republicans who also did.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because you wonder, why were they so eager to get a voice vote? And that's usually because they don't. Sometimes it's procedural. Everybody's on board with this. We don't need a roll call. In this case, it was a lot of Republicans didn't want to have to go on the record with their stance on this because it's controversial. It's not an easy issue. It's not a 90-10. Some would say they think it is in certain areas, but they didn't want to have to register that. So all these people who came in after the fact, they were mostly Democrats. But you go, well, why mostly Democrats? Because they were concerned about the sandhill crane hunt. They don't
explain
want the crane
that
hunt.
debate as well, because that turns out to be a really big issue, and that is much more partisan than potentially the wake surfing, where there's more of a split even within the parties.
Right. This has been proposed for several years now. There was one lawmaker who referred to the sandhill cranes as, I forgot if it was tenderloin of the sky.
Yeah.
Do you remember this one? It was
Ted Nugent, I believe.
what did he call it? So there's been a push to have the sandhill crane
ribeye of the sky.
That's
if
the
I'm
word.
remembering.
Ribeye of the sky.
Okay.
That's the one. And so there's been a push from some, including Ted Nugent, to have a sandhill crane hunt, and it hasn't gone anywhere for years now. And all of a sudden, I guess, if they need to flip one lawmaker to have enough votes to have a majority to pass this thing, if there was an actual roll call vote, which there wasn't, then maybe they were saying, hey, we're going to have the sandhill crane hunt added onto this finally.
Go ahead.
What stood out to me when that moment happened where they had the vote is a lot of times in these meetings, they're doing the Roberts Rules of Order or whatever it is, and you hear him say, any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. He says any objections? Hearing none, as there are voices yelling, no. Hearing none was my favorite part of that, because they clearly had the idea, we want this on a voice vote and get this thing through.
Yeah.
The business of politics is crazy, that's for sure. From my understanding, from a little bit of research on it, a lot of the debate goes to some farmers not happy with how sandhill cranes can kind of basically attack fields, looking for seeds, eating all that. The governor on the Democratic side has said that there will be some some money for farmers who are affected by this. I know conservation groups are worried about the similarities between sandhill cranes and whooping cranes, which are a protected species. So the fear that with a hunt, maybe some whooping cranes would unfortunately be caught up in that as well because of the similarities there. Again, this seems almost comical that these two things were combined into one, and that this became like the moment of the end of this session.
And I think that goes back to, you were talking in the first segment, the legacy of Speaker Vos, right? Is figuring out a way to get something to pass. Even though it might not, there's many opponents of wake surfing, there's many opponents of sandhill crane hunting, and somehow putting the two together was the perfect combination to say, okay, we got enough people to be able to support this and pass it. Speaker Vos was, I think Democrats and Republicans and his Republican critics that we already mentioned would say, yes, he's a shrewd tactician in that chamber, and he's a master of the art of getting things passed.
They might say some other things about him too,
Yes,
but that's
they
a whole
would.
separate story. I will say that we should explain, is this bill passed the assembly, but it still has to pass the Senate. And while all of this drama was going on the Assembly floor, there was a Senate committee, the Senate Transportation Committee, that was debating these competing wake surfing bills, and they had 6 hours of testimony from people who, on very short notice, came in from all across the state to testify. They were critics, they were supporters, and there were dozens and dozens of people who wanted to have their moment to talk. And in the middle of that hearing, word bleeds in about what's just happened in the Assembly with the Sandhill crane hunt, and Senator Corey Tomczyk, who was the chair of that committee, takes a moment to say, just so you know, this issue is dead for this session. The Sandhill crane hunt being added to that bill means we're not taking this up in the Senate. These bills are dead, so you can keep testifying, but I just want you to know nothing's happening this year. So even though it did pass the Assembly, does not mean the crane hunt's going into law, does not mean the wake surfing 200 or 300-foot restrictions will go into law. It could still technically happen, but from what that senator said, he's saying the issue's dead.
As one of our lovely grumpier floor directors here on the morning show says, all that for that?
All that
for that.
So why have the vote? Why put,
On the Assembly
even though
side,
it's a voice
yeah.
vote, why put members who are going to be up for re-election, all 99 seats are going to be up for re-election, why put them in that situation where now there's a record that they voted for Sandhill crane hunt or wake surfing?
Representative Robert Brooks of Saukville, who was the one who sponsored the industry-favored bill, one of the sponsors of it in the Assembly. I think he also sponsored the amendment for the Sandhill cranes. He then testified, came into the Senate chamber, and he said something to the effect of, this issue is just impossible to get consensus on. It has been, they didn't bring it into the legislature until just last week, but it's been talked about behind the scenes. All of these lawmakers are hearing from industry supporters, people who are really wealthy, people who buy some of these really expensive boats, who are like, hey man, what are you doing? I invested a lot of money in this stuff. So they're getting it from that side, but then they're also getting it from the people who are fishermen and everything else who say, I don't want this to come and ruin my lake. So it's been extremely controversial, and this is one of those hot potatoes nobody wants to touch.
So if there is no guidance from the state legislature, then under that assumption, where do we go? Does it continue with just the local ordinances? Are there challenges to them?
For now, it is the local ordinances, and there are lawsuits that are pending challenging some of these ordinances. One in particular in, I think it's the town of Scott in far northwestern Wisconsin, where it was some out-of-state people who have property up there who challenged the ordinance that banned their boats from that lake. So I think it may be this may be settled in the courts in the short term, and then next session, does this come back in some other form? But it certainly hasn't been settled. It's an issue that's going to, I think, plague politicians in all across Wisconsin for some time to come.
This is something you've been covering for years when it's been debated at the ordinance level. What are some of the competing ordinances we're seeing in some of the municipalities?
That's one of the things that those who want a statewide standard say is the problem is they depend on where you are. Some lakes have said no wake enhanced activity at all. You can't really constitutionally ban a type of boat, but you can say no boats, no matter what kind, can do this artificial wake enhancement. Others have set distance restrictions, 300 feet or 500 feet from shore or from other boats, or they've set depth restrictions. You can't be in less than 20 feet of water. So there are a variety of, but I think the model ordinance effectively just talks about the wake enhancement and distances, but it's a patchwork. You go to this town and it's here, and this town and it's there, and there are questions about how do you enforce that? A lot of these local lakes don't have their own police agencies who can enforce this on the lake, so you go to the DNR. Can the DNR go lake to lake and enforce this? It really does leave a lot of questions, and that's the argument in favor of a statewide standard, is everyone would know. The argument against the statewide standard is lakes are different. Some are shallow, some are deep, some are small, some are big. So there are arguments that there should be localized ordinances that are different. But it's an issue that's not going away, and the drama at the end of the session really underscores how difficult it is.
It'd be hard to sum that up.
Yeah,
as we did right there.
And we'll probably be talking about it here again at some point. As we mentioned, it was one of 45 bills that passed out of the Assembly in that last session. The Assembly now stands in recess, but is it really done for 2026? How does a legislative session in Wisconsin end? And what is still to come? There is more. Jason's going to help us with that when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. Jason, I know it's been a whirlwind for you to keep up with everything that's been happening. When I talk about 45 bills passing in one day, how do you stay on top of what is going on? But I know you've been, this has been a busy week.
Yeah, it was, so intense. There's so many bills we could talk about that have major impact on the state of Wisconsin. There was several health bills that passed. One of those was regarding postpartum Medicaid coverage. Right now, Wisconsin is one of only 2 states that has that postpartum coverage for Medicaid. That's Badger Care in Wisconsin for 60 days. And then you're off of that special program. All the other states, other than 2, we're one of the 2. All the other states have that extended for a whole year. So one of the bills that passed was this extension of Medicare, Badger Care for postpartum women after birth for a whole year. So that was a big piece of legislation that didn't look like it was going to be passing, because Speaker Vos originally was against that. But at the very end, maybe potentially because he's got the prospect of on the horizon of retirement this upcoming year, maybe that kind of flipped him. But one of the assembly members on the Republican side said, and he's in an area that's sort of a swing district of the state, and he said, if we don't pass this, I am not going to run for re-election. When every single vote's going to count, when we go to the, when we're talking about every assembly seat, who's going to control the assembly, Democrats or Republicans, that's a big piece of motivation when some person in a more swingy area of the state tells you, I'm not running for re-election, because incumbency has a great value in Wisconsin. So that was one piece of legislation that passed.
That's kind of the fascinating backdrop to all of this, is now it's not just a major election year when it comes to the midterms throughout the country, but certainly here in Wisconsin as well. I'll admit it, again, not being as locked in as you are to much of the political side of things. You hear this is the end of the session and we're in February. You're like, that's great work if you can get it.
Yeah, right.
Is that common? Can you explain to viewers, to listeners, to voters out there why the work can seemingly stop so early for people paid by our tax money to represent us?
Every 2 years, we've got a new assembly election. Every single assembly seat's on the ballot every 2 years. And during the time that I've been here, every spring, they wrap those sessions up pretty early. I'm talking February, March, potentially, for an election year. Where
our weather experts would say it's not even spring yet.
Yeah, right. But they do that and then they go off to campaign, right?
That's the idea, is that it gives them many months then to prepare their forms that they have to get onto the ballot. The primary for partisan, that's the Assembly and the Senate, and then the national governor's race as well this year. That's set for August, so they'll have some months to go do signatures, to get on the ballot, and this will give them the chance to campaign. And yeah, you're right, it is really early, and that was one of the things Governor Evers mentioned in his State of the State. He said, there's still 10 more months left in the session. There's a lot more work we can be doing for the state of Wisconsin. And he really called them. He said, can you please stay on? There's a lot more work to be done. And he's actually planning to call them into a special session. The governor has that constitutional power to call the legislature into special session. And he says he plans to do that this spring. And
we've seen that before, though, right? Yeah. And then the Republicans gavel in, gavel out, and it's over.
He has the power to call them into special session. He doesn't have the power to tell them what to do in that session. They often, in the past, they would gavel the session in and then seconds later gavel it out. So they're meeting the requirement of the law of the state of Wisconsin. The governor has the power to call them in, but they don't have to do anything.
Has there been pushback on that? Or is that just accepted operating behavior, I guess?
No, we would ask them, why are you doing this? Why not?
Not even the gavel in, gavel out, but the wrapping up the session so early in a campaign year and then spending so much of the year not actually doing the work of the job, but doing the campaigning of the job.
And I guess they would say, look at that 40 plus bills passed on one day of the session. So there was, the last 2 months, the last 2 months have been just a mad rush. There was committee meetings. It seemed like every couple of days there'd be a big committee meeting, various committee meetings, there's several of them meeting on a day, and they're going through dozens of pieces of legislation, and then of course voting on dozens as well. As Governor Evers said in his State of the State, he signed more than 800 pieces of legislation in his 2 terms as governor, 800 pieces of legislation. Of course, that's a Republican-led legislature and a Democratic governor. And yeah, they're actually agreeing to things because there's 800 new pieces of law thanks to the Republicans and the Democrats agreeing on things.
Here's the thing, though. I like to think I'm a pretty smart guy. But when I was in Missouri and you cover politics, statutorily, there was a day that was the official end of the session. And it was in the spring. They had to have that same 2-year rotation, but it was a day you knew the session was over. Here, it's so much more complicated because the session isn't over, but it's sort of effectively over because the Assembly has said it's done with its sessions. If you look at the calendar, there are still 3 more floor periods scheduled in March, April, and May. So they could come back, but they've signaled they're not. But the Senate still plans to, right?
The Senate has some more work to be done. They haven't been meeting. The Assembly's had more sessions that we've covered than the state Senate has. So there's still more work to be done in the state Senate to get caught up to, looking at these bills that
the bills that just passed the Assembly.
Yeah,
right?
but apparently not the Sand Hill Crane and
well, that's what was said. We don't know. Things can change, right?
Right.
It could still happen.
So maybe it can be tacked onto some other piece of legislation. I mean, that's the art of wheeling and dealing, when it comes to the legislature, right? I mean, think about school funding. One of the ways that Republicans and the Democratic governor agreed was, okay, Republicans want more money for school vouchers, and then the Democratic governor wanted more money for public schools, and that was how they were able to pass that in years past was, okay, more money for vouchers and more money for public schools. So there is wheeling and dealing that's going on all day long. As far as the end of the session, Republicans and the Democratic governor still have one big thing they haven't been able to agree on. I mean, there's many things they haven't agreed on, but one of those things is what to do with the $2.3 billion with a B $billion budget surplus. Now that's estimates, right? So the finance, the Fiscal Bureau, which is a nonpartisan sort of fiscal watchdog, number cruncher for the legislature, has estimated that at the end of the budget in another year, the state's going to have potentially $2.5 billion in the coffers. So the big debate right now is what should the state legislature, what should the governor do with that money? And there's competing programs. The Assembly, the Senate, which are both Republican led, they have different proposals. And then the governor has a third proposal, and none of them are on the same page right now. And so, yes, the session may be over for the Assembly, but they're going to have to come back to pass whatever this deal is going to be in the future. Could be they come back and do an extraordinary session. They could use one of those floor dates that's already on the calendar that right now is going to be empty for the Assembly. There's a lot of options, but right now the deal has to be made.
We are announcing that today is the last open record of the year. We're going to go work on the ones for next year. No, I'm kidding. I wish that was, but no. So obviously there's still more work to be done, and you can't say that the session is officially over, but that, as we understand it, is the last sort of big floor period, at least for the Assembly.
For the Assembly.
I'd be curious, since we started this whole conversation with Robin Vos and kind of these different eras of Wisconsin politics, you get the rise of the Republicans with Scott Walker in Act 10 and Vos's taking over of the speakership. I'm fascinated by the kind of second phase of his time as speaker, working with a Democratic governor and the back and forth that had to happen over the last 7 years or so. It seems like the future here in Wisconsin is completely wide open. Robin Vos is stepping down. Governor Evers will not seek re-election either. Control of the legislature is kind of up for grabs under new maps as well. What do you see as kind of the biggest questions, the biggest paths that we could go on here in our state looking forward?
I think the key is going to be the November election. Who's going to have control of the state Senate? Who's going to have control of the state Assembly? And who's going to run the government? I mean, so it's an open. This is going to be that's going to be the key to figure out what's moving forward. Is who's going to control the legislature? As far as if Republicans or if Democrats run the Assembly next year, I think you're going to see people that might already be in a leadership post take on the role of speaker, whether if it's Republicans keep the majority in the Assembly. I think you're going to see Tyler August, who is the Assembly majority leader right now. He's sort of number 2 to Speaker Vos. He's had that post since 2022 when the former Assembly majority leader Jim Steineke was leaving. So Tyler August on the Republican side, and then Greta Neubauer on the Democratic side, the minority leader right now. I think those would be the people that would be in line to be the next speaker, depending on who wins the Assembly. But again, you're going to have this new leadership. It's not going to be Speaker Vos anymore who's calling the shots. And then for the governor, is it going to be a Republican governor or a Democratic governor? That's really going to be up to the people when they decide in November. And that's going to dictate whether you have trifecta, meaning you're going to run the governor's office, the Senate, and the Assembly. Is it going to be one party that has control like we had with Scott Walker, or is it going to be this divided government like we've seen under Governor Evers and the Republican legislature?
One of my favorite things about this is sitting down for a podcast. We didn't have any guests come in this week, but I didn't have to prepare that much because I have a fountain of knowledge. We just ask, and Jason just knows.
Like wind him up, let
everything.
him go.
It's about we appreciate all you have to share on all of this, Jason, because I know there's a lot bouncing around up there.
No, I appreciate. I mean, it's going to be incredible. When you think about divided government, how Governor Evers has been a goalkeeper, blocking a lot of the things that Republicans have tried to do, but they have been able to agree again on 800 pieces of legislation that have now become new law under a divided government. So, we focus a lot on, and he said this in his State of the State, we focus a lot on his vetoes and how he's vetoed various things, including, partial veto, creative partial vetoes in the budget, but they still also, even though they disagree on a lot, when it comes to some of those very controversial issues like abortion and guns and school vouchers and things like that, they may disagree on that, but they've also been able to agree on a lot too over these 2 terms of Governor Evers.
A new era of Wisconsin politics is looming, and of course we're going to be all over that as it happens. Boy, this November election is going to be something else. We will go off the record when we come right back. It is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question we have not prepared for, literally because I didn't come prepared with one, but Carl whispered one in my ear. Yeah. I like this one. This is good. Carl, I'll let you have it.
All right. Playing the role of Sarah Smith today on the podcast. This has been going around in my head for a few weeks now, but all of us have social media, some of it required by our job, some of it just for personal use and entertainment. The algorithm is fascinating, how it's dominating our lives now and what it seems different social media platforms latch onto. So my question to you guys is, what is the odder, stranger line of posts or reels, whatever it is, that seem to be fed to you? What is your algorithm determined that you are interested in that for you was like, really? Okay.
It's what I'm aware of how your actions on social media drive the algorithm.
You watch something, you're like, shoot, now I'm going to get all that.
I want to watch the rest of this video, but I know if I do, I'm going to get more of these. So then you're caught in that moment. But for me, it started with, I was having a little bit of hip pain. So I started trying to find stretches and other things for hip mobility. All of a sudden, I am in the hip mobility stream. I mean, I'm telling you, if I could 24 hours a day, I could do hip exercises. I don't do them. I watch the video and go, that looks really good.
Doesn't have quite the same effect.
And I do that while I'm sitting and drinking my coffee in the morning and having breakfast. And I go, that's pretty interesting. And I keep getting more of those. But recently, and this is the exact example of this, I got one there. It was like a therapist for like couples therapy TV. And it was a really intense little back and forth, and I watched it. Now that's all I'm getting. My marriage is fine, but I keep getting these couples therapy videos. And anyway, that's...
And your wife sees, and it's like something you want to say.
Yeah, right. It's something you want to tell me about? Anyway.
Jason, what you got?
Wow. It's incredible because the algorithm ties in with how many seconds of this video. It's a 15-second, 20-second video if you're watching all 18 seconds or you're pausing it.
Yeah.
And sometimes like I'll have my phone on and I'll have it on X or whatever, and it's like, okay, I have to do something else, so I leave it up. No, I'm not looking at that post for 3 minutes. I don't. So one of the things I was following President Trump's announcement regarding the what we used to call UFO files, right? So what are these UFO files going to be? He's called.
You're getting all the UFO videos.
So now I'm getting everything
deep in the conspiracies.
So I can go into it, but I mean, there's a lot of different theories out there.
Anything pique your interest?
But I mean, and then if I stay on the video or the clip for 3 seconds, then it's like the algorithm has tunnel vision. It's like I also want to know about other things. So it really right now thinks that I'm only want to focus on the UFOs. We shouldn't say aliens because we don't know what they're going to reveal yet. But the UFO stuff, and then I also get a lot of pro wrestling stuff right now. It's like
you should blow this out. Just get Jason's alien theories.
We only have 45 seconds.
So very quickly, recently it's been a lot of Olympics because that's all I've been watching for the last couple of weeks or so, coming off of the Winter Games. So it's been a lot of that. But beforehand, what kind of prompted this in my head? All of a sudden, I think it was when the Oscar nominations came out, I just started getting all of these clips of like the funniest or favorite moments of award show speeches from the decades. So it was like this moment you could never forget from the 1990 Oscars. And I'm like, I don't know what this is or why you think I like this. But now it's just all award show speeches or gags or moments from past shows.
Careful what you watch.
Yes. Getting you ready for the next Emmys.
I guess.
Yeah, prepping your big moment and what's going to happen. Just don't mess it up. That's all the time we have for right now. We'll wrap things up when we come right back. That's all the time we have on Open Record. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss or an issue you think we should investigate, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. And with that, I'm Bryan Polcyn. We'll be back next week.